Greetings. Could you tell me a bit about yourself?
My name is Stuart Hall. I was born in Jamaica in 1932. I'm a cultural theorist that was a founding member of the Birmingham School of Cultural Studies. I moved to England and received a scholarship to attend Oxford University, where I attained my Master's of the Arts, and I studied all the classics and read Marx, Lenin, and taught at Open University for most of my life, and retired in 1997. I have contributed to many journals, including the New Left Review, where many of my theories and ideas were first published.
Interesting. Okay, so could you tell me what led to the formation of your theory?
Well, I always doubted the ability of social scientists to come to any real conclusions regarding the way media influences us all.
Could you explain that a bit?
Well, having a simple survey to see how many people support something doesn't concern me.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter because in reality, polls mean nothing if you can't garner support through a mass media, even for something as polarizing as war. I read Marx, but I am not a Marxist per se. I don't believe that we should simplify all things down to economics or money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Being a person of color from Jamaica had real influence on this part of my theory, because people would see me as a person with darker skin and not just through a Marxist lens of being rich or poor. I see these divisions as one of the reasons why there's been no Marxist revolution in the world. We decode things very differently by race, age, social standing, and so on. I presented my theory at the University of Leicester in a paper called Encoding and Decoding in the Television Discourse for the Council of the Europe Colloquy. I wrote it for students at the Center of the Contemporary Cultural Studies. My paper was widely accepted in academia, and it's been massively influential in the realm of cultural studies, of which is still considered useful in today's society.
I see. Okay, could you tell me a bit about your theory?
Well, one of my main theories is in decoding and encoding, which is the idea that mass media, such as television, magazines, broadcasts, so forth, are encoded with various meanings. These meanings change depending on one's cultural background, not only with one's cultural background, but with one's ideals and how they were raised. Their socioeconomic backgrounds, and their main socializers in life.
I see.
This is not merely through media alone, but also through a nonverbal communication as well. In other words, there are codes in our communications, and each of us arrives at meanings in ways that we individually make sense of. Your experiences and my experiences can both be very different. So a message we receive from a newscast will be very different for both of us. For example, I might decode a message on a attribution to go to war as a disaster, but you might find it comforting in that our troops are helping to keep us safe.
I see, okay.
So we can have different views on the same topic, and media influences that.
Absolutely. Okay, can you tell me a bit about the key concepts of your theory?
Absolutely. So my theory is divided into three main categories, which as follows. The first concept is what I call dominant hegemonic position. This is where the consumer interprets the message exactly as it's intended. This is when the message was created by the dominant class and was intended for individuals with the dominant class, within the dominant class. A great example of this would be an American male of European descent watching a show on TV regarding the war on terrorism, where they will see this as a message of hope, that the powers that be are keeping them safe, so they can rule. Others, such as someone of Middle Eastern heritage, may see the same show with a sense of dread or fear. This is because they are decoding the message in very different ways, based on their own experiences.
I see. Okay.
And their own cultural backgrounds.
Okay.
So, the second concept of my theory is referred to as the negotiate position. This position is when you understand the dominant hegemonic position, but you don't accept parts of it. People in this position will have to make things up so that their beliefs fit within the dominant. A great example of this is with the past election, which I will get into shortly. At any rate, they have to, in effect, negotiate with themselves and the code they're receiving so they can decode it with a sense of meaning and thus accept the code that's being administered.
Okay.
The third and last concept is what I call the oppositional position. This is when one understands the dominant hegemonic code, but holds oppositional beliefs. So some people will understand the dominant code and all the underlying messages, but will not decode them the way they were intended. A great example of this is when one watches corporate news, knowing that it is bought and paid for by advertisers, many of which are massive corporations. These messages are intended for the ruling class. When interpreted in the way people hold oppositional positions, will end up rejecting the code, ultimately.
So I see.
Yeah.
Okay, and can you relate your theory to any recent events in the world?
Well, a good example that I would like to highlight, it could be from this past presidential election, actually. In that voters chose between one of three positions. First, the dominant hegemonic, which represented white middle-class Americans who decoded the intended message and accepted the intended message, which was voting for Trump. Which can also be said for the other candidate as well, Hillary Clinton.
Absolutely.
Then there's the negotiated position, which was reflected in the Americans that believed aspects of the dominant hegemonic position, yet still held reservations about the candidates. This effect is seen strongest in people who voted against their own interests, but within the partial acceptance of the dominant. Lastly, the oppositional position reflects best in voters who didn't accept the dominant message and thus rejected either candidate by not voting, or by voting for a candidate that wasn't in the mainstream. So, yeah.
So, what have been some of the critical responses to your theory?
Well, critics of my model of encoding and decoding, in particular Sven Ross, have accepted my theory but would expand on the positions held by the encoders. My theory holds that the dominant hegemonic position is the ultimate assumed position by the mass media influencers. But critics of my model suggest that encoders can also influence positions by the mass media influencers. Furthermore, David Morley feels that my model doesn't sufficiently represent the various modes of communication that media has fragmented in its positions. He has stated that he believes my model incorrectly creates a mass media that is homogeneous. In other words, not all media shares in the dominant ideology, which has been fragmented throughout the various ways of exporting our different positions in today's society. But by assuming that all media is the same and not mixed by left and right leaning ideologies, we run into a problem where all media must be homogeneous. So I'll concur that this is a problem that needs to be updated, and the new template for my theory is something that I believe would hold strong in today's modern era.
Absolutely. Okay, and so how do you respond to those critics of your theory?
Well,
Ross and Morley.
Well, when I first came to these concepts, mass media was relegated to a very small number of media outlets, and the influencers, such as a TV personality like Walter Cronkite, can be a great example of a dominant hegemonic position of power, and was seen throughout the entire country and throughout the world, actually. In today's modern era, media is fragmented to cater to a vast amount of people. So the model does need to be updated, as Ross and Morley have discovered. However, the model, even to this day, holds up.
Definitely.
So.
Perfect. Well, thank you for taking your time to talk to me today.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Perfect.
Thank you.